Welcome back to DreamHarbour, traveler. The harbour lights are glowing softly tonight, and the tide is moving with its usual gentle patience between waking and dreaming. Tonight, I would like to tell you a story called The Last Tea House Before Winter. At the edge of a quiet valley, where stone paths wound between gardens and old wooden homes, there stood a tea house with wide windows that looked toward distant hills already touched by the season's first pale frost. The tea house belonged to a woman named Ilara. Each autumn, when the days grew shorter and the evenings arrived a little earlier, people throughout the valley began paying closer attention to the warm glow of her windows. Not because anything unusual happened there. Quite the opposite. They watched because they knew exactly what would happen. And somehow, that was comforting. Every year, just before winter arrived, the tea house entered its most peaceful season. Ilara would open the doors before sunrise. She would sweep the stone steps. She would polish the brass kettle until it reflected the soft morning light. She would arrange fresh herbs along the shelves. And she would prepare for the valley's oldest tradition, the winter welcome. It was not a festival. It was not a celebration. There were no speeches, no performances, no decorations grand enough to draw visitors from distant places. The winter welcome was simply a season of shared tea. For many generations, the people of the valley had gathered at the tea house during the final weeks before winter. They came quietly, one at a time. Sometimes with friends, sometimes alone. They sat beside the windows. They watched the changing weather. And they prepared themselves for the slower months ahead. The tradition asked for nothing more. Perhaps that was why it endured. On the first morning of the season, Ilara stood outside her tea house beneath a sky the color of soft silver. The garden beds had become still. The summer flowers were gone. Only sturdy autumn plants remained, their leaves glowing gold and copper in the early light. She took a slow breath. The air carried the scent of damp earth, distant pine trees, and the faint promise of snow. Then she unlocked the door. The familiar bell above it gave a gentle chime. The tea house awakened for another season. Inside, polished wooden tables waited patiently. Clay cups rested neatly upon their shelves. Bundles of dried mint, lavender, chamomile, and lemon balm hung from ceiling beams. Everything seemed ready. Everything seemed peaceful. The kettle began to warm. A soft sound filled the room. The sound of water preparing to become tea. Not hurried. Not loud. Simply present. As the first light spread across the valley, the first guest arrived. An elderly shepherd who lived among the northern hills. He removed his coat, sat beside the window, and smiled. "You have opened for winter once again." Ilara returned the smile. "As always." The shepherd nodded. That seemed to be enough. Soon steam rose from a cup between his hands. Outside, the hills waited quietly beneath drifting clouds. Inside, warmth gathered around the room like a familiar blanket. And so the season began. Day after day, people came. Not because they needed tea. Not exactly. What they sought was something more difficult to describe. A pause. A place between seasons. A room where nothing urgent was expected of them. A place where autumn could finish its gentle work before winter arrived. The tea house offered this without ever speaking of it. Its wooden floors carried the memory of countless footsteps. Its windows framed familiar views. Its chairs welcomed people exactly as they were. Some mornings brought gardeners. They spoke softly about bulbs sleeping beneath the soil, about tools cleaned and stored away, about seeds waiting patiently for spring. Other mornings brought bakers. The scent of bread lingered in their coats. They discussed cinnamon, nutmeg, and recipes meant for colder days. Sometimes musicians arrived carrying instrument cases. They ordered tea, sat near the windows, and watched clouds moving across the hills. Occasionally someone would hum a quiet melody. Not a performance, just a companion for the steam rising from a warm cup. The tea house never felt crowded. Even on its busiest days, people seemed to understand its rhythm. Voices remained gentle. Movements remained slow. The entire room breathed together. Outside, autumn continued unfolding. Leaves drifted along stone paths. The garden settled into rest. Morning frost appeared more frequently. Each day carried a little more stillness than the one before. Elara noticed these things. Not because she searched for them, because they arrived naturally. She had spent many years tending the tea house. She understood the language of seasons. Not through words, through observation. The way sunlight entered a room, the way birds adjusted their songs, the way evening arrived, the way people wrapped their scarves a little tighter with each passing week. One afternoon, a group of children arrived after school. Their cheeks glowed pink from the cool air. They gathered around a table near the fireplace. Each received a small cup of apple tea. Steam curled upward. They watched it with fascination. One child asked when winter would arrive. Nobody answered immediately. Instead, several adults near the window looked outside. The hills stood calm beneath a sky filled with slow-moving clouds. Finally, an elderly woman smiled. Winter arrives differently every year. The children considered this carefully. Then they returned to watching their tea. Satisfied. The answer seemed complete enough. And perhaps it was. The days continued. The tea house settled deeper into its season. Every morning began with the kettle. Every evening ended with quiet cleaning. Between those moments flowed a steady stream of ordinary kindness. A gardener sharing seeds. A baker offering pastries. A musician leaving behind a melody. A neighbor carrying extra firewood. Nothing remarkable. Nothing dramatic. And yet these small gestures accumulated like snowfall. Softly. Patiently. Transforming the atmosphere of the place. As autumn deepened, Elara began preparing the winter blends. This was her favorite task. Shelves filled with jars gathered throughout the year. Dried herbs, flower petals, fruit peels, fragrant leaves. Each carried memories of another season. Summer sunlight, spring rain, warm afternoons in the garden, golden evenings beneath orchard trees. She moved carefully among them, measuring, mixing, listening to the faint rustle of dried leaves. The work required attention but never urgency. The recipes were well known. Some had existed longer than anyone could remember. Valley evening. First frost. Garden rest. Lantern mint. Snowfall blend. Each mixture carried its own quiet personality. Some felt bright. Some felt warm. Some seemed made specifically for silent afternoons beside windows. The scent of herbs often drifted through the tea house. Guests would pause, smile, and ask which blend was being prepared. Ilara always answered. Yet she suspected the names mattered less than the feeling. People recognized comfort before they recognized ingredients. One evening, after closing the doors, Ilara remained beside the window. The valley stretched beyond the glass. A few lights glowed among distant homes. The gardens rested beneath moonlight. The hills stood dark and peaceful against the sky. She wrapped both hands around a warm cup. The room had become very quiet. Only the kettle remained awake. Its gentle sound seemed almost like breathing. Moments such as these had become precious to her. Not because they were rare, because they arrived every day. Reliability has its own kind of beauty. The tea house never surprised her, and she loved it for that. Outside, a light wind moved through the valley. Inside, warmth lingered. The evening felt complete. The following week brought the first dusting of snow to the distant hills. Not enough to reach the valley floor. Only enough to brighten the highest ridges. News of it spread quickly. Visitors arrived eager to glimpse the white peaks through the windows. The tea house became a gathering place for observation. People sat quietly together, watching, sipping tea, noticing the landscape's gradual transformation. Nobody seemed impatient for winter. Nobody seemed reluctant either. The valley accepted seasons as they came. Perhaps the tea house helped with that. It provided space for transitions. A place where change could be witnessed gently, without resistance, without hurry. As the days shortened further, candles appeared on the tables. Their small flames reflected in the windows after sunset. The effect was lovely. Guests often lingered longer in the evenings. The tea house became a pocket of light surrounded by gathering darkness. Safe. Warm. Steady. Travelers passing through the valley occasionally discovered it by chance. One such traveler arrived during a rainy afternoon. His coat carried droplets of water. His boots were muddy from the road. He entered quietly and chose a seat near the fire. For a long time he simply rested, watching the room, listening. Eventually he asked why everyone seemed so calm. Several guests exchanged amused smiles. The question felt unusual. Not because it was difficult, because nobody had considered it before. Finally, a baker answered, "We know winter is coming." The traveler nodded uncertainly. The baker continued, "So there is no need to rush." The room returned to silence. The traveler thought about this while drinking his tea. By the time he left, he seemed calmer too. Outside, rain continued falling softly upon the valley. Weeks passed. The winter welcome continued. The tea house gathered memories. A scarf forgotten on a chair and returned the next day. A recipe exchanged between neighbors. A song quietly shared beside the fire. A child growing tall enough to reach the counter without assistance. These moments settled into the building itself. Into its walls. Into its floors. Into the familiar creak of its wooden beams. Places remember things. Not in the way people do. Not through stories. But through atmosphere. The tea house carried years of peaceful seasons within it. Visitors sensed this immediately, even when they could not explain why. One morning, Ilara opened the door to find the valley transformed. Snow had arrived during the night. Not a storm. Not a deep covering. Just enough. A delicate layer rested upon rooftops. Garden walls. Stone paths. Tree branches. Everything appeared softer. The world seemed to have lowered its voice. She stood for a moment, simply looking. Then she smiled. Winter had arrived. The kettle warmed as usual. The chairs waited as usual. The shelves remained filled with tea. Yet something had changed. The season had crossed an invisible threshold. Guests began arriving earlier than normal. Many carried excitement in their eyes. Not the excitement of celebration. The excitement of recognition. Winter had come exactly as winter always came. And somehow that felt wonderful. Throughout the day, people sat beside the windows, watching snowflakes drift beyond the glass. The tea house glowed warmly against the white landscape. Children pressed their hands against the windows. Adults wrapped both hands around steaming cups. Conversations became even softer, as though everyone wished to match the weather. Outside, snow continued falling. Inside, warmth deepened. The winter welcome had reached its quiet conclusion. Not with an event. Not with an announcement. Simply with winter itself. That evening, after the final guests departed, Ilara remained by the window once more. Snowflakes drifted through lantern light. The valley seemed suspended between moments, neither moving nor still. Just resting. She looked around the tea house. At the tables. The shelves. The candles. The kettle. Every object felt familiar. Every corner felt lived in. The season's work was complete. Not because anything had been finished. Because everything had settled. And settling, she believed, was its own accomplishment. The weeks that followed were among the quietest of the year. Snow covered the valley. Footsteps became softer. Mornings arrived wrapped in silver light. The tea house continued opening each day. Its rhythm unchanged. Its welcome unchanged. Its warmth unchanged. Visitors came and went. Some stayed for hours. Others only briefly. All seemed grateful for the simple existence of the place. A room. A chair. A cup of tea. A window. Sometimes that was enough. Especially in winter. Especially when the world outside moved more slowly. One evening, the musicians gathered near the fireplace. Not for a performance. Simply for company. They carried small instruments. A violin. A flute. A gentle stringed instrument polished smooth by years of use. They played quietly. The melodies drifted through the room like snowfall. Nobody applauded. Nobody needed to. The music seemed less like entertainment and more like weather. A soft presence passing through the tea house. Something to accompany tea and firelight. When the final note faded, silence returned naturally. Comfortably. Like an old friend resuming a familiar seat. Winter continued. The valley slept beneath its blanket of snow. The tea house remained awake. Not brightly awake. Not busily awake. Just enough. A steady lantern in the season. A place where warmth gathered. A place where people remembered how pleasant it could be to simply sit. To simply observe. To simply be. And as the months moved quietly onward, the memory of autumn remained. Not sharply. Not nostalgically. Just gently. Like the lingering fragrance of tea in an empty cup. The winter welcome had ended. Yet its spirit remained. Because the tradition had never truly been about preparing for winter. It had been about making room for it. Making room for slower days. For quieter evenings. For reflection. For rest. The valley understood this. The tea house understood this. And perhaps, traveler, you understand it as well. Now the snow falls softly beyond the windows. The fire burns low. The kettle hums its familiar song. The tables rest beneath warm candlelight. No one is in a hurry. No one is expected anywhere else. The evening stretches gently forward. Untroubled. Unbroken. Peaceful. The valley sleeps beneath drifting clouds. The hills wear their white winter coats. The gardens dream beneath the snow. And the tea house remains where it has always been. Waiting. Welcoming. Warm. The sound of cups being placed upon wooden tables grows distant now. The music has faded. The candles burn lower. Outside, snowflakes continue their patient descent through the quiet air. Inside, warmth lingers. Nothing more needs to happen. Nothing more needs to be done. The season has arrived. The tea has been shared. The windows have reflected another winter sky. And the little tea house rests contentedly within the valley it has always called home. Far away, beyond the story, beyond the snowy hills and quiet windows, the harbor lights of DreamHarbour still glow. The tide still moves gently along the shore between waking and dreaming. Travelers continue arriving. As they always do. As you did tonight. And here at the harbor, I remain nearby with another lantern and another story waiting for another evening. For now, though, the tea house grows softer. The valley grows quieter. The snowfall grows lighter. Everything settles. Everything rests. The harbor lights shimmer across calm water. The night holds you gently. And sleep, perhaps, is not very far away now. Good night, traveler. DreamHarbour remembers you. And I shall be here when the harbor lights welcome you back again. Good night.